final speaker is David Collins. He is the managing partner of Active Learning International, a worldwide consulting firm for development and operation of active adult communities. He has built and operated Spain's first residential community for people above age 55, and that particular project was recognized as the finest retirement development in Europe. David has more than 30 years of experience in this industry and sits on many boards. So, without further ado, David.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning and to be with all of you. And I'm indebted to the Silver Security Group for inviting me, and to Manulife for supporting this. And Professor Davis had an idea that we should invite more older people to these kinds of events because they have opinions. And Peter, I'm happy to tell you I'm here to help you with your cause. I've been in this business for a long time. It's a wonderful business. And I don't come from the academic side, I come from the business side. And I think that if we look at what the subject is, the challenges for Singapore with the aging of society, we can look a little bit to how business will evaluate the opportunities to make money. Because if there are opportunities to make money, and people can get into the business and learn how to lower the risk and increase the reward, the government will certainly be looking at that to see how the government policy can be adopted to take care of people who can't afford to be in the kinds of communities that I'm talking about, but who need to be cared for. We started our business in the late 70s, and it started for a very practical reason. My partner's mother was living with him. Her sister moved in. Another sister moved in. He had three of them. They were driving him crazy. He said, we've got to do something about this, and he called me and another fellow, and we put together what we called retirement hotels. And they were hotels, because senior living is, in many respects, a hospitality business. And the average age of our resident when we started that was in the mid-70s, early 70s. And as time went by, the residents started to need a little more help. They wanted more, they complained more, they needed more. We found out that we could charge for that. Well, we had to charge for it because we were bringing people in and paying those people to be able to provide services that cost money. But there was also a profit potential in those services. And that profit potential was increasingly important. So what we've tried to put together here today were just some data about the U.S. experience, what some averages are, the average cost of a community in this style, 70 to 100 units. We think that's an optimum size, but 70 to 100 units takes 2 or 3 years to get there. To get to full occupancy, and getting to full occupancy is critical, of course, because that's when the profit starts to really make sense. When we started our first communities, nobody would lend us any money. We couldn't get any money. They said, what are you doing? We don't know what that business is. There isn't any business. I mean, we've been creating societies for 5,000 years. This is a new business. It's a new industry. And recognizing that it's a new business and a new industry is critically important. Apple, Baidu, companies like Microsoft, they're new. They're new businesses. Caring for each other has been around for generations. How we do that, and how we do that as a business is going to be very critical to the development of what's going to happen here in Singapore and around the world. Is it need-driven? Sure it is. It's need-driven from many different aspects. It's need-driven for memory care. It's very interesting about memory care. When we started our business, we did not have a part of our business that dealt with dementia. Not that we didn't have dementia, I think we didn't recognize it. But also, as people age in place, we look at what the age was when we started, the average age of our resident, maybe 75. Today, the average age in assisted living, 87. 50% of people over the age of 85 will have some form of dementia. I don't think there is an assisted living community built in the United States today, or in the West today, or in China, or anywhere else, that doesn't recognize that we must deal with dementia. We're going to have to deal with it. It's going to be the aging in place of the resident. There will be dementia. So memory care. Now, depending on home sales, in a later slide, we'll talk about where does the money come from. One of the places it came from is from home sales. What happened in the United States in the last several years is interesting. Home sales stopped. The market crashed in 2008. Things changed quite dramatically. The money that people had in their homes, which they could use to be able to pay for services they didn't have to pay for before, that money wasn't there. That really has affected the continuing care retirement community more than the typical assisted living community, because as we'll get into this, we'll see how people will buy the right to occupy. They will buy the care on a long-term basis, and their family are expecting to get back the amount of money that they put in to begin with. But they're not going to get that back unless somebody comes in to replace them, and the only way they can do that is if they have that corpus of money that allows them to buy in. And if they can't sell their homes, they probably can't do that. So it is less dependent upon home sales, and it had to get out of that dependency. People are less able to defer the decision, and there's an interesting characteristic that we look at in terms of identifying how the business works. The customer and the consumer are two different people. The consumer, of course, is the elderly person, but who's the customer? In the case of the United States, the customer is usually the oldest daughter, the wife of the oldest son, another family member. Now, what we've gone through in the United States in the last several years is that the daughter who was working did not have time to care for mom. And then the market crashed, and the daughter lost her job. And now she doesn't have the money, but she has the time. So in the industry, the customer becomes the competitor. And it's a business where the competitor doesn't want to be in the business. The competitor wants help. The competitor has a life to live, has other responsibilities, has a pressing need for money, and really may not have the ability and the opportunity to spend the time it takes to take care of mom. Age demographics, aging parents, is how communities are built. We were talking earlier during the break about some of the things that Singapore is looking at in terms of how we're going to take care of the elderly. Maybe underground development because of the lack of land. I don't think that's going to work. We're not going to be able to put the seniors underground. Not immediately. I think what we have to do with seniors is what we do around the world, and that is to try and keep them in familiar and comfortable situations where the family feels good about what they do. Who's the salesperson when it comes to selling, moving into a retirement community? Who do you think is the salesperson? Exactly right. It's the children. One of the things we realized as we built our business was that we needed to train the person who came to see us, who wasn't the senior elderly person, it was a member of the family. We needed to train them in what we were doing, because what was their job? Their job for the family in, say, Southern California, her job was to tell her brother in Chicago and her sister in Atlanta why she was moving mom into a retirement community. And there is a feeling of guilt. There's a feeling of, should I be doing this? Should I be responsible for taking care of mom on my own? We had to make that person, whoever that person might be, comfortable with the fact that moving mom into this, and I say mom because 80% of our residents have always been women, 20% men who are having a wonderful time. But we had to make sure that that person was absolutely comfortable with what they were doing. Help to remove the guilt. Help them to understand that mom living alone would not have anyone to talk to, would probably not have very good nutrition, would be bored, would be unable to care for herself at a certain point, and that this was really the best thing. So many things that we did and that we continue to do. I'm no longer an operator. Today we consult with people around the world in the business, but everybody wore strict clothes. Nobody wore uniforms. You don't have uniforms at home. So the staff didn't wear uniforms. Of course, you get into the requirement for medical care, then yes, you're probably going to have some uniforms. Nutrition being so critically important, there's a profit element that you look at, a cost element in terms of food. We were serving in my company 10,000 people, or 10,000 meals a day. So you can imagine the cost of food is critically important. Average cost may be $5 per person per day, raw food costs, not the cost of preparation service. Several reasons. You don't serve as much food as they once ate. If they can't finish what you serve them, they don't feel good about themselves. They can have seconds. Portion control is critically important. Everybody shows up at the same time every day for meals. That would sound not so comfortable perhaps to us, but in terms of the people showing up at the same time, means that the staff who were cleaning their rooms, making their beds, and doing their laundry are now in the dining room taking care of their meals and serving them their lunch and their dinner. And as you know, in a restaurant or a hotel, the staff in a restaurant are busy for a couple hours at lunch and a couple hours in the evening, have not a whole lot to do in between. This leveled the cost to a degree, and it meant that the senior elderly person was dealing with the same person for all of their needs and was with their friends for their meals. So portion control, nutrition, critically important. We put up here the community amenities. These will change, but I think what you'll notice from this is that there are amenities we're all familiar with. These are amenities that the senior elderly people have been living with for all their lives. So we don't necessarily have a lot of different things. But health and wellness, and I like the idea that what we're now talking about when it comes to senior living is wellness, because wellness is what it's all about. But now let's move into the profit mode a little bit. Wellness means we have them longer. The longer we have them, the longer they're paying rent, the longer we're providing services, the more opportunity that we have to make a profit on the business. And we, in our side of the industry, are not in any way going to solve the problems that societies deal with in aging. We're going to take care of a small portion of it. We're doing a lot of work in China right now. And China's numbers are, of course, I think the English translation for the word China is the word huge. Everything is huge in China, and the numbers of people, we're looking at a very small portion of the market. We're looking at how you add value. There's a base rent, there are community fees and care fees, and then services for scheduled and unscheduled needs. And services for unscheduled needs are a critical part of the business. Continuing care retirement communities is one of the models. The model's been around for a long time. Well over 100 years after the Civil War, they were started. Communities to care for people who had been injured in the war and who were aging in place. I was not an advisor at that time. But when Abraham Lincoln and his successive cabinets dealt with the problems of aging, they started CCRCs. They're continuing care retirement service communities There are 2,000 of them in the United States. Probably half are run by nonprofit church-related organizations. They provide life care benefits on a long-term basis. And they've gone into an industry which usually you look at assisted living as being located a little bit outside the city, and you look at having the opportunity of caring for people maybe 2 floors, maybe 3 floors. In cities like Singapore, I think you're going to have to look at high-rise. This is the Claire in Chicago. Unfortunately, the Claire went into bankruptcy. One of the reasons it went into bankruptcy is that it is extremely difficult to retain and contain the costs in a situation of where you're delivering over a high-rise. This is a project that was done by an architect whom I know rather well, Brad Perkins, of Perkins Eastman in New York. And this is in Tokyo. And they were able to design a high-rise building which has 288 independent living apartments. People will therefore age in place and then be able to use the dementia units, the skilled nursing units, the assisted living apartments. And the way this design is done, people will be able, the owner will be able to change the care levels without changing the physical nature of the building. And what it looks like today is that. And Japan, of course, has an aging population that is pretty dramatic. Their numbers are very, very significant. But as you can see from this, it's attractive, it looks good. None of us would mind living in a place like this. There's universal design that is incorporated now into everything we do in the field of seniors housing and healthcare. And these things aren't very complicated, and the key is to make those not noticeable, so that if you walk into this particular room or this one, you won't notice this. There's an awful lot about the business that is subtle. People don't notice things that are happening. This is one called Segovia, which is in Palm Springs, near Palm Springs, California. And Segovia is a continuing care retirement community. This is the kind of a community that needs to answer this kind of question. Where does the money come from? And for most of it, it is from the sale of real estate. I think in many respects, a continuing care retirement community is no different than an independently standing assisted living community, except for the model of marketing. This model of marketing is to sell. The other model is to rent. This model offers continuing care. If you pay a certain fee to begin with, you'll get some or all of that back, or your family's beneficiaries will, and you'll be able to amortize a portion of your monthly fees, the association fees, and you'll be guaranteed a particular kind of health care over a long period of time. You can see without the amortized entrance fee, what the monthly fee would be. And we were talking earlier about the monthly fees for things like dementia care. One of the best operators in the United States, with 40 communities, purely dementia care, about 100 units in each building. Their average charge is $7,000 per month, and each one has a waiting list.
Wow.
For the kind of living that you find in a CCRC, it might be much different than what you find in an assisted living community. In an assisted living community, it is very often a bedroom. 20% double occupancy, but that bedroom is in a building that is designed to get people to do what we all did in our bedroom this morning. We got up and we got dressed and we left. And the idea is for the resident to get up and get dressed and leave and come out into the community and participate in activities and meet other friends and talk to people and age in place with wellness in mind. Aegis Gardens, a fellow by the name of Jerry Meyer, who is a wonderful example of a businessman who sees an opportunity and develops it. Jerry and his company have 39 assisted living communities, and one of the interesting ethnic descriptions of an assisted living community is that the residents in a given community will mimic the population ethnicity within 10 miles of the community. And of course, there are numbers of Chinese communities in the United States. One of them is in Fremont, California. So Jerry thought we should specialize in a Chinese community. And he built Avis Gardens. And in this community, it is 100% Chinese, 100% Chinese staff. The languages are the more common languages, Mandarin, and the interesting thing to me and to everybody else in the business is that his numbers are better in this community than in the other 39. They're now building their second and third all Chinese community, one in San Francisco, one in Seattle, and another one planned in Vancouver, British Columbia. The rates change with the kind of care. The kind of care has to do with the expense ratios on a 150-unit building with a benchmark cost, on average at $132,000, renting at $1,000 monthly. That's the rental model. This is the basic model with 90% stabilized occupancy, and it will provide a rental operating expense ranging depending on whether it's independent or assisted to the numbers that you see. This provides the expense ratios, the profit ratios, and what the management fees are. Annual operating expense, taking 140 units and coming down to the cost per resident per day. The average assisted living base rate for Alzheimer's monthly and annually, average for the United States, are the numbers you see on the screen. Now, how we handle it, and dementia care is going to become increasingly more important. Interestingly, in China, where we've been doing a lot of work, it is very difficult to get policymakers to talk about dementia. It doesn't exist in China. They don't have it. There's a merry-go-round called denial about dementia care in every society, certainly in my own. But there are necessities that the industry has to look at in terms of relating to dementia care. And the average nursing home rate, private room, semi-private room, and the annual costs are only going to grow. Separate security. Dementia care is, for the most part, not health care. It is custodial care. And some of the speakers this morning talked about where the money is coming from and how it's being allocated. My wife and I have a long-term health care policy, which we got many, many years ago. And I'm glad we did, because insurance companies are moving away from providing long-term health care policies as quickly as they can. And the reason they're moving away from it is because we're living too long, and if it was the case that people didn't move in until their average age was late 70s, but now it's late 80s, then the care that they're going to need is significantly more at that age than it would be at a younger age. So the insurance companies are recognizing they can't possibly keep up without increasing premiums, and there are fewer and fewer companies in the United States offering that kind of long-term health care insurance. The connection to a hospital, the connection to a nursing home will have a great deal to do with the management of dementia care. We're looking at the average assisted living community in the United States being at least 25% dementia care in the not too distant future. The physical connection to a hospital or nursing home, it's fascinating for me to sit here with you and listen to some of the numbers about nursing homes. We looked at nursing homes, we, assisted living operators, looked at nursing homes as partners. When people needed nursing home care, they would go into a nursing home, maybe for a week, maybe two, and then they'd come out and they'd come back to us. Nursing homes, when people got better, the nursing homes didn't want to keep them because they could no longer get reimbursed for the care they were giving them. So we became the customer of the nursing home. We were talking about nursing home residencies of a couple of weeks. Now we're looking at years, 3 years, 4 years. You will probably never forget where you were on 9/11. Neither will you ever forget the first time you ever go into a nursing home. It is so dramatic to see what happens in a nursing home. It is so dramatic when you put yourself forward and think, could this happen to me? Nursing home care is improving greatly, but it is going to become a fact of life for all of us. And when we look at the government of Singapore, the city of Singapore, when we look at the same thing in Denpasar, in Sydney, in Rome, we're looking at the fact that this is happening. People are aging in place. There were no geriatricians when we started our business. Today, there are hundreds of geriatricians. There are no universities that I know of specializing in Social Security like your university is. I think you're going to become the focal point of the world in terms of looking at this problem and what can be done about it and how to make it work, because it's not going to go away. Adult day services are going to become increasingly more important. The daycare, respite care, we used to call it. We would let somebody drop off an older person. We'd take care of them for a weekend. They could go away. That's respite care. That gave us an opportunity to show the elderly person what it's like to live with us. It gave us an opportunity for the children to see what it was like. Respite care, adult day care, will become increasingly more important, and so will home health care. Home health care is going to keep people at home longer, and people want to stay at home. I don't think that this is something people want to do. They don't wake up in the morning and say, oh good, I'm going to move into an assisted living community. Doesn't happen. That's not how it works. They want to stay at home. And as long as they can, that can be helped with adult daycare. And adult daycare, we think, is going to be significantly more important. I'm on the board of an adult daycare center in Mexico City, and the first one opened the day it opened. It was at 22% occupancy, and within 3 months, it was at 50% occupancy. Those kinds of rate increases are very unusual, but people know that they are going to have to do something with the care of their elderly, and daycare may be the answer. So let's look at China. And China's not alone in this. The one-child policy differentiates China from a lot of other countries, but where did it come from? It started in 1978. But the reason that it started was because China was exploding. The numbers of people were incredible. And 400 million births were prevented by the one-child policy. And this is what contributed. Families with 6 brothers and sisters, 5, 3. And what does that mean now? It has catastrophic implications when you look at what's happening to the children who have to look after the elderly and who now have to look after not just grandmother, but grandmother's sister, grandmother's brother. Perhaps they never married, perhaps they don't have children. Perhaps the children no longer, and the grandchildren no longer live nearby. They live in Singapore, they live in Sydney, they live in Boston. So the dynamic is changing, and it's changing dramatically. What's important here? Cultural acceptance. I don't think there's a society anywhere that says, gee, this is wonderful. Let our society age and we'll put them in assisted living communities. That's not the case. But there has to be a cultural acceptance. We look at filial piety and how important that is, but then we have to look at how realistic it is to apply the principles of filial piety to the needs that are coming to us every day. The financial capability of seniors and their families, and regulations. When we started our business, we had one regulation, and that was that a resident had to be able to leave the building in case of an emergency under their own power. That was the only regulation we had. Today, there are regulations of all kinds. We helped to craft the regulations. We didn't wait for the regulations to come. We went to the policymakers and we suggested what the regulations should be. That helped both sides. We don't want to see any poor performance of established projects. But we do need to have the availability of land. And we would ideally, and by we, I mean a developer of an assisted living community, would ideally want to see that land being available so that people who live there could say, the reason I live here is because my daughter lives 10 minutes away. And when you can get to that kind of a point, you're successful. Best time for seniors to consider community is before it's needed. Doesn't happen often, but it is happening more often because there's more of an awareness of the kinds of communities that are available, and there is certainly not as much of a stigma as there might have been 20 years ago. But I think that that discussion that children have to have with their parents is an important one. The discussions that parents had with us were certainly important to our own formation, and now the discussions that we have to have with our parents, with our grandparents, with our families, with our brothers and sisters. There is a company doing one, and Econ is a company that I know of. I don't know them well, but they've done some successful communities, and they're doing one not far away, as you can see. But that may not be an answer for a community. It's not necessarily. Marriott came into this business and it didn't work for them. Marriott thought that the brand was what was important, and indeed they've got one of the best brands in the world. People don't choose a community because of a brand. They choose a community because of its quality and its accessibility for people to come and visit. So if you look at the growth rates for the retirement industry in various countries and the growth rates in Singapore, which are so dramatic, and you look at the birth rates, each successive generation of Singaporeans will have in the next 18 to 20 years. So what does that mean? It means, as we heard earlier, that the numbers of people supporting an elderly person will be fewer, and the numbers of healthcare workers will be fewer. So the demographics, in comparing Singapore and Malaysia, and the hospital densities, these are all numbers that are available to you. You know about that. What's going to happen in the next several years as the population increases and the elderly population increases? Who's going to support the retirees? Is it going to be the government? Is it going to be the families? Is it going to be pensions? Is it going to be real estate? These are the questions that have to be answered. These are the questions that were answered in Japan, and these are the steps that have to be taken when determining how to choose a retirement facility or where to put a community. And it must be a community, not a facility. It mustn't be called a project. You've got to do all the things that a business person does to assess the financial feasibility. When we did our business, we were always, like any business, looking for access to capital. The real estate investment trust business became the answer to what created the multi-billion-dollar business in the United States, because we, as operators and developers, could take the land under our building, sell it to a real estate investment trust. We would then lease it back from that real estate investment trust, and with the money we got for selling that, we would be able to go and do another community and another and another. The real estate investment trust idea has got some legs in Singapore. I think it's going to be very, very important for the government to consider something like REITs or another method of financing, because the developer has to be able to see that he can have a 50-year project in order to lower the risk and increase the rate of return. The operational steps are quite similar to anything that you do in opening a hotel. The time frame for doing it is a lot earlier in terms of getting the executive director and getting the training done. I think training is the value-added component. When an industrialist looks for a project, the industrialist looks at what I need is a factory, and then I need machinery. What we look at in the assisted living business is that we need the property, we need the staff, and the staff are of critical importance, and we must continue to train and train and train, and that is the value-added component that is brought to the industry, and that is the staff. I don't think there's anybody more important than the staff, and what we have found over the years is that the staff love what they do. And that's hard to train for. Either they have that or they don't. Either they like working with elderly people or they don't, and if they don't, I don't think they're trainable. Scheduling when that person is, can you imagine all of the jobs that this industry creates? The number of jobs is so significant. And as I said, so much of what we do is like the hotel industry, but the modifying the policies and procedures to conform with what's required locally, that's got to be done well before you get to opening. The operational steps are determined by the people who've been in the industry, who understand what it is. We call on the academicians to give us the kinds of information that we need, and so much more is available today than when we started. But there's a complete list of various things to do, and I'm not going to read those to you. You can look at those when you get the slide presentations after. There are many websites that you can go to that will provide a great deal of information on successful applications of studies of senior housing and how to work into them. So I do want to say that the challenges are here, they're real, they're going to be answered, we are going to age in place, this is all going to happen, and how we handle that is going to be of critical importance, not just for the people of Singapore, not just for each and every one of us that are in this room, but it's happening worldwide. If we look at China just by itself, they will have 1/3 of the world's elderly in 30 years. 235 million people over the age of 65. Talk about challenge. In China, it's huge. In Singapore, it's real. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for David? Anyone?
One question for you. You have mentioned a lot on your customers, your competitors, but you have not made very much mention on the people staying in assisted community. When I take care of my mother, who is 84 years old, and one key thing that I feel that makes an aging person, live well, is her happiness. And I wonder whether you do happiness index on your residents. Thank you.
Because if we don't, we hear about it from the resident every day. We hear about it from the family every day. But we really, for example, our staff never say, this is just like home. It's not just like home, it is home. And how we make that work is important in the training every single day. It's tough getting old. It's not for sissies. And getting old means that you're going to develop other kinds of infirmities and problems and things you can't do anymore that you used to do. So we've got a challenge with keeping people happy and keeping them content. We recognize that challenge. You need to recognize that challenge, and you do need to work it. I think, that's the difference. Your question is the difference between our kind of business and other businesses. You ask that kind of a question in other businesses, not really. You do want happy employees, but in this kind of a business, that's an important question.
My name is Victor. Just want to know, in some hospitals, they couldn't pay the bill and they don't want to bring the patients home. So in assisted living, in this case, if you don't use the model of upfront payment, the monthly payment, if they refuse to pay and the customer, that means the children, ran away,
Sure.
how do you dispose of the old?
It's a very good question, and it certainly comes up. And there are many answers, but I remember being in the room one time when that came up, and we were talking to the family. It wasn't the immediate family because there wasn't any more immediate family. And I remember hearing one of the staff say, well, if you can't pay, Aunt Martha is coming home. They paid. They were not prepared to take Aunt Martha home because there was no way they could care for her. Sure, it's a problem. people run out of money, and you just can't say, sorry, you can't do that. I mean, if you did anything like that, the newspapers would have a field day with you, your business would be over, it doesn't make sense. In the reserve account, you have to prepare for things like that to happen, because they will happen. However, part of the regulation is that if someone becomes sick, we're not licensed to care for them. We are to a degree, but beyond that degree, we are required to get help from the government, from the policymakers, from the state, to find a suitable accommodation for the individual. Tough question. Yes.
Yeah, just one quick question. I think Singapore's land cost is very high, and for those aspiring to set up this business, what's your advice and whether you think it's feasible to set up one in Singapore?
That's why I think that the real estate investment trust is going to become so important, because if the real estate investment trust can own the land and lease the land to the operator has a much better chance of doing it. But that's going to be a critical question.
Okay, thank you, Lee.